It was a rainy Wednesday morning, and the city bus was packed as usual. People huddled close to avoid the cold, some wearing headphones, others lost in their phones. Among them was Harold, a soft-spoken elderly man in his late 70s. Dressed in a worn brown coat and carrying a canvas bag filled with groceries, he had just finished his weekly trip to the market. Despite the noise and bustle, he sat quietly in a corner seat near the front, gazing out the fogged-up window as raindrops trickled down the glass. Harold had served in the military decades ago. He rarely spoke of it. He'd lost his wife 10 years earlier and now lived alone in a modest apartment. Every week, he took this very bus at the same time, always greeting the driver with a respectful nod, always giving his seat to anyone in need, unless his knees were acting up, like they were today. The bus screeched to a halt at the next stop, and in came a group of young adults. Loud, full of energy, and clearly irritated by the weather. Among them was Tyler, a 23-year-old with a short temper and a massive ego. He was dressed in a bright red hoodie, earbuds dangling from his ears, and chewing gum like he was angry at the world. As he stepped onto the bus, he immediately looked around for a place to sit. The bus was nearly full. No empty seats. His eyes stopped on Harold. There he was, old, quiet, alone. Sitting near the front, like a king guarding a throne. Tyler walked up to him. "Hey," he snapped, loud enough to draw attention. "That's my seat. Get up." The people around them turned their heads, unsure if they heard right. Harold looked up slowly, visibly confused. "I beg your pardon," he replied politely. Tyler leaned closer, voice more aggressive now. "I said get up. I always sit here." Harold blinked, then shifted uncomfortably in his seat. His knees were already throbbing, and standing would be painful. "Young man, I've had a long morning and—" "I don't care about your morning," Tyler interrupted. "You're old, you've been sitting your whole life. Let someone else take a break." Murmurs began to ripple through the bus. A woman seated nearby whispered to her husband, "Is this really happening?" A teenage girl recorded discreetly from her phone. The driver glanced in the rearview mirror but said nothing. Harold took a breath. He didn't want trouble. He started gathering his bag, preparing to stand. But just then, a boy, maybe 10 years old, spoke up from the back. "Hey! Leave him alone. That's not your seat." Tyler turned sharply, glaring at the kid. "Mind your business." The boy's mother pulled him closer, whispering for him to stay quiet. The atmosphere in the bus had shifted. What started as an awkward encounter was turning into a public confrontation. And yet, Harold remained calm. He placed a hand gently on the seat next to him and said softly, "There's room here if you don't mind sharing." Tyler scoffed. "I don't sit next to people like you." Silence fell like a heavy curtain. Everyone understood what he meant, even if he didn't say it outright. The disrespect wasn't just about a seat anymore, it was personal. Deeply personal. An older woman near the back stood up. She had been quiet until now. Her voice trembled, but it carried strength. "Son, you should be ashamed. That man served this country while you were still learning how to tie your shoes." Tyler rolled his eyes. "Oh, great. Now he's a war hero?" Another man chimed in. "Even if he wasn't, he's a human being. He doesn't owe you anything." More passengers began to speak out, their voices overlapping. The driver finally pulled over and stood from his seat. "Enough," he called out. "Either you calm down or you get off this bus." Tyler looked around. Dozens of eyes were on him. Disgust. Judgment. Disapproval. For a moment, he hesitated. His face flushed with anger, but also embarrassment. He muttered something under his breath and stormed to the back, slamming himself into a corner seat that someone had just vacated out of discomfort. Harold stayed seated, still silent. He didn't gloat, didn't smile. He simply looked down at his bag and then out the window again, as if nothing had happened. But something had happened. The passengers on that bus would remember that moment, not because of the confrontation, but because of the way dignity held its ground against arrogance. Because of how silence, sometimes, speaks louder than a shout. And the boy? He leaned over to his mother and whispered, "He's like the superheroes in my comics. Quiet, but brave." And she smiled. But this wasn't the end of the story. Because what happened after Tyler got off the bus would leave the entire city stunned. The bus rolled on. Tyler sat at the back, arms crossed, his jaw tight with frustration. But his silence wasn't from guilt, it was pride wounded. He didn't expect to be called out, especially by strangers. Especially in public. He was used to being the loudest voice in the room. Today, it didn't work. And the worst part? People had stood up, for him. For that old man who didn't even fight back. That was the part Tyler couldn't understand. Why would anyone defend someone who just sat there and took it? The next stop came. The bus doors opened, and Tyler jumped out, not even waiting for the full stop. He stormed off down the wet pavement, ignoring the honk from a nearby car as he jaywalked, hands in his pockets, hood pulled up. His ego bruised deeper than he'd admit. But that wasn't the end. About 20 minutes later, the bus reached the last stop downtown. Harold stood slowly, wincing as he put pressure on his knees. He was the last one off. As he stepped down, the driver reached out and gently said, "You didn't deserve that back there. I'm sorry I didn't speak up sooner." Harold nodded with a faint smile. Sometimes, silence says more than shouting ever can. The driver watched him walk off into the drizzle, disappearing into the sea of umbrellas. Hours passed. And then, like fate wasn't quite done yet, Tyler crossed paths with Harold again. This time, it wasn't on a bus. Tyler had ducked into a convenience store near his apartment, hoodie still damp, still fuming from the morning. As he moved through the aisles, he heard a commotion outside. Raised voices. Screams. A man shouting, "Call the police." Tyler rushed to the front of the store to see what was going on, and froze. There, just across the street, a woman had dropped her purse. Two men had tried to snatch it, but someone had stepped in. Someone older. Someone familiar. It was Harold. He had intercepted the thieves, one of them almost half his age, and managed to trip one of them to the ground using nothing but his cane and a sudden, precise movement. The other ran. The woman screamed. A few pedestrians began filming. Sirens wailed in the distance. Tyler stood there, stunned. The same man he had yelled at, disrespected, humiliated, was now standing tall, shielding someone else with his body. His coat soaked through, breathing heavy, yet steady. The thief on the ground tried to get up, but Harold pointed his cane down and said just loud enough, "I suggest you stay there." Police arrived moments later. They took over. The woman was safe. The attacker in cuffs. And Harold? Harold simply asked if the lady was okay. She nodded, tearfully. Tyler backed away from the glass door, shaken. This wasn't just some old man. He was something else. Someone else. That evening, Tyler went home in silence. He sat at the edge of his bed, staring at the wall. For the first time in a long time, he felt something unfamiliar, shame. Not the kind you brush off. The kind that lingers. He replayed the bus scene in his mind, over and over. His words. His tone. And Harold's calmness through it all. Then the scene outside the store. The courage. The strength. The quiet nobility. The next morning, Tyler did something he hadn't done in years. He woke up early. Got dressed. Took the bus. And waited. Stop after stop passed. And then, there he was. Harold stepped aboard. Tyler stood up. Not just from his seat, but from his pride. He walked toward the front, voice steady, but low. "Sir," he said. "I owe you an apology. For yesterday. And for not knowing what respect looks like." The bus was silent. Harold looked at him, his face unreadable. A long moment passed. Then, a small nod. "It takes strength to admit when you're wrong," Harold said. Tyler motioned to the seat. "Please. It's yours." Harold smiled, not because of the seat, but because of the growth. And as the bus moved forward through the morning sun, the people around them seemed lighter. Something had shifted. One moment of confrontation had become a lesson for an entire bus. One act of courage had changed a life. And one young man had finally learned that real strength doesn't come from taking power, but from giving.